Summary of the Hairy Ape by Eugene O'Neill. The first part of the Hairy Ape takes place in the fireman's forecastle of a big ocean ship, where Yank and his co-workers hang out when they aren't shoveling coal into the boilers. Many people are drinking, singing, and yelling in the room, which is loud and crowded. Yank sits down in the middle of the noise and listens to his fellow stokers. He is the most developed person in the forecastle, which is like a cage and where the guys look like Neanderthals. The stokers keep getting louder until Yank finally tells them to be quiet because he's trying to think, which makes everyone laugh. Still, everyone pays attention to him for a moment, but soon they go back to talking. One of the sailors sings a song about a woman waiting for him at home, which the Yanks don't like at all. He goes on to say that the ship is the only place these guys can call home. Hearing Yank talk about home, a drunken stoker named Long gets up and says, "All men are born free and equal." He also calls the ship hell and says, "All men is born free and equal." Long says that the capitalist class has turned the stokers into wage slaves, but Yank tells him to shut up, calling his ideas Salvation Army socialist bull. Instead of agreeing with Long's criticism of the unfairness of capitalism, he argues that the work he and his fellow stokers do in the engine room has nothing to do with the rich people in the first cabin. In fact, he says that rich people aren't strong or brave enough to work as stokers. He says that only real men have the nerve to work in the hell that is the stokehole. He says that this place is where he belongs. "We belong to this, you're saying?" asks Paddy, an older Irishman who works as a stoker. Paddy argues with Yank and talks about the good old days when he used to sail above deck on beautiful ships with the wind in his face. Paddy paints the stokehole as greedy and unfulfilling by saying that this kind of work was hard but worth it. Yank reacts badly to Paddy's ideas, calling him crazy and moving angrily toward him. He then backs off and thinks that Paddy doesn't deserve a beating because he's too old to understand what it means to work in the stokehole. Yank says to his co-workers, "I belong," and he doesn't, and he says that Paddy has lost his nerve. Yank then says that he likes being at the bottom of the world because he thinks that his job is what makes everything work. "I'm de end. I'm de start." He says, "I start something, and the world moves." Mildred, the daughter of a steel magnate, sits with her aunt on the top deck and looks out at the sea 2 days later. The two women talk about Mildred's wish to see how the other half lives. Her aunt attacks her for wanting to help the poor in ways that only make them feel poorer, but Mildred doesn't care and says she's just trying to be of some use in this world. She says she'd like to be sincere for once, but she doesn't know if that's possible. She then says that the money she got has left her with none of the energy, none of the strength of the steel that made it. In order to find this kind of energy, she has chosen to take a tour of the engine room. Mildred is determined to see the stokehole, even though her aunt doesn't believe her. She even told the captain, who didn't want to let her do this, that her father is the president of Nazareth Steel and owns the ocean ship, so he has to let her do what she wants. When an engineer finally comes to take her down, he tells her to change because she is wearing a white dress. He tells her that she will probably touch grease on the way down, but she just says, "It doesn't matter. I have many dresses that are white." Men are busy moving coal into the burners in the stokehole. Every so often, an engineer blows a whistle from a place where he can't be seen. When the bell blows, they open the boilers and are hit with heat, so they need to take breaks often. Most of the men complain that the engineer blows the whistle too fast, but Yank tells them they are weak and pushes them on until he too gets angry. Soon, he turns around, raises the shovel over his head, screams into the darkness, and yells violent threats at the engineer with the whistle. At this point, he sees that the other stokers are all looking behind him, so he turns around, crouches down, and holds the shovel over his head. Mildred is standing there in her white dress, staring at him. O'Neill's stage directions say, as she looks at his gorilla face and his eyes bore into hers, she lets out a low, choking cry and shrinks away from him, putting both hands up in front of her eyes to block out the sight of his face and protect her own. She screams, "Take me away. Oh, that dirty animal." She passes out at this point, and the engineers next to her take her away. As he sees her leave, Yank feels himself insulted in some unknown way in the very heart of his pride and says, "God damn ya." Back in the forecastle, Yank sits like Rodin's the thinker while the other stokers talk loudly. Again, he tells them to be quiet because he's trying to think. As they try to figure out what's wrong, Patty suggests that he's fallen in love. "I've fallen in hate, get me?" Yank says. Long stands up and says that Mildred's appearance in the stokehole only shows how far apart the capitalist class and the workers are. He tries to get Yank to see that they can make a difference as voters and citizens if they just work together. Patty agrees with Long that it was like Mildred had seen a big hairy ape that got out of the zoo. Yank vows to get even when he hears this. After 3 weeks, Long takes Yank to Manhattan's Fifth Avenue. "We're trespassers here," Long says. "Workers, get off the grass." Yank gets antsy because he doesn't understand that he probably won't be able to find Mildred herself. Long tells him to wait until church is over, when rich people will be all over the streets. Yank gives up on finding Mildred and tries to pick fights with rich people, but no one even notices him. Long chooses to go home because he knows Yank will get them into trouble. Yank finally hits a rich man after getting into fights with several other people. When the man calls for help, a whole platoon of policemen rush in on Yank from all sides. The next night in jail, Yank sits like Rodin's the thinker and compares his cell to the cages where animals are kept at the zoo. When he says this, the other inmates laugh at him. He then tells them about Mildred and tells them that she is the rich man's daughter. A man in the next cell suggests that Yank join the Wobblies if he wants to find Mildred. When Yank says he doesn't understand, this prisoner gives him a piece about the Industrial Workers of the World group to read. The story is taken from a senator's speech in which he warned the Senate about the Wobblies. They plan with fire in one hand and dynamite in the other, the prisoner reads from the newspaper. They won't stop at murder to get what they want. Even though the senator meant these words figuratively, Yank takes them literally and chooses to join the Industrial Workers of the World when he gets out of jail. He thinks this will help him get back at Mildred and her family. In a fit of anger, he starts shaking the bars of his cell, and when a guard comes to tell him to stop, he rips the cage apart. As the screen goes up, the guard calls for help and sprays water into the cell with a hose. A month later, Yank goes to a branch of the Industrial Workers of the World and asks to join. Inside, a secretary gives him papers and greets him in a friendly way. But Yank keeps hinting that the Industrial Workers of the World have hidden plans to blow up companies like Nazareth Steel. This makes the secretary angry, so she tells the guys in the office to throw Yank out. Yank is sitting outside on the street and says, "So those idiots don't think I belong either." Yank goes to the zoo the next day and tells an ape that he doesn't belong anywhere. "You get me," he says, agreeing that he is the hairy ape Mildred thinks he is. He tells the gorilla that he will set him free and that they can work together to cause trouble for the people who want to cage them both. But when he lets the gorilla out, the animal squeezes him so hard that his back breaks. It then throws him back into the cage. "Even him didn't think I belonged," Yank says. "Ladies and gentlemen, step forward and take a look at the one and only, the original hairy ape from the wilds of," he says with his last breath. This kills him, and the monkeys in the cages around him start chattering.
About the author. Eugene Oneill was born to Irish refugees in a hotel in New York City. Both of O'Neill's parents were in a traveling theater group, and he went to a Catholic boarding school. His father was a drunkard, and his mother was hooked on morphine. This situation in his family affected the plays he wrote later. As a young man, he started working on ships and joined U.S. labor groups and movements. He got tuberculosis when he was in his early 20s, and after that he chose to write full-time. In 1920, Beyond the Horizon, his first play, opened, and in the fall of that year, The Emperor Jones made its debut. Jones was his first big hit. It was about how O'Neill felt about the U.S. taking over Haiti. O'Neill had 3 children from his 3 marriages. After being depressed and drinking too much for most of his life, O'Neill's hands started shaking in 1943. This made it hard for him to write for the last 10 years of his life. He died in a hotel room in Boston. Even though O'Neill asked his third wife to wait 25 years before publishing Long Day's Journey into Night, which he wrote in 1941 and 1942, she released it in 1956. It won a Tony Award for Best Play and gave O'Neill the Pulitzer Prize for Drama after he died.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.